March 14th, 1981. The Beverly Hilton Hotel, Los Angeles. The Directors Guild of America Awards dinner. 600 people in black tie. Directors, producers, studio heads, actors whose presence confirmed the industry's sense of its own importance. Crystal chandeliers throwing warm amber light across white linen tables, set with the precision of an industry that understood every detail, communicated something about power. From the entrance, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. The industry at its most formal, its most certain of its own significance. Inside, at a table near the center of that magnificent room, two men were seated 40 feet apart who would, before the evening ended, occupy the same space in a way nobody had planned for, and nobody who witnessed it would ever stop talking about. Robert De Niro, Clint Eastwood, the same industry, the same room. Two entirely different ideas about what it meant to be an actor. Those two ideas had been on a collision course for years. By 11 o'clock that night, the collision would be complete. What almost nobody in that room knew was that De Niro had been building to that evening for months. And what De Niro himself didn't know was that Clint Eastwood had been ready for a man exactly like him for his entire career. By 1981, Robert De Niro had established himself as something the American film industry had rarely produced. An actor whose commitment to transformation was so total it had become its own mythology. Raging Bull the previous year. 60 pounds gained for the role, not as a stunt, as an act of complete identification with a human being whose interior life he had decided to enter so fully that the external reality had to match. He was, by any measurement the industry recognized, the greatest film actor of his generation. He carried it, not with easy swagger, but with the compressed intensity of someone who had worked for the knowledge and intended to defend it. Clint Eastwood was something De Niro found genuinely difficult to categorize. He had been a star longer, built something, a production company, a directing career, films that defined American cinema's relationship with violence and the mythology of the West. Dirty Harry, the outlaw, Josie Wales. But in De Niro's private accounting of what constituted genuine craft, Clint occupied a category that troubled him. The squint, the minimal dialogue, the stillness that critics called powerful and that De Niro suspected was simply the absence of work. He had said something close to this in an interview, carefully, with the deniability of a man who understood what direct statements cost. Clint had read it, said nothing. And the nothing communicated that whatever De Niro had said, it had not been worth the energy of a reply. The Beverly Hilton ballroom carried the sensory signature of old Hollywood at its most formal. Gardenias and expensive tobacco, the low percussion of silverware, conversations at the precise volume of people who understood they were being observed. De Niro arrived late, not from disorganization, but from the contempt of a man who had decided industry rituals were theater he was willing to attend but not perform in. Clint was already there. He sat with both hands flat on the white linen, his posture carrying that quality of absolute physical settledness that 20 years in public life had made indistinguishable from his actual character. He wasn't performing ease. He was easy. The distinction was invisible to most people and completely apparent to anyone who spent their professional life studying the difference between performed states and genuine ones. De Niro studied it from across the room, watched the way Clint held himself, the way the people around him oriented toward him without appearing to. Clint commanded rooms not by filling them, but by occupying a specific, immovable position within them. The early awards moved through the program, and then a name was announced that De Niro had expected to be his. De Niro's table went carefully quiet. He set down his water glass, looked at Clint's table, and stood up. 40 feet of Directors Guild ballroom carpet. 40 feet everyone who witnessed the walk would remember in the way specific distances get remembered when something consequential happens across them. De Niro moved through it with compressed, forward-tilting energy, the purposeful momentum of someone consumed by where they are going and why. He didn't look at the tables he passed. Clint's peripheral vision caught him at 15 feet. Not tension, not alarm, a settling. The last quiet internal act of a man who has decided exactly what this is and exactly how he will meet it. The table felt it before they understood it. Conversations tapered. The woman to Clint's right placed her drink on the table. The older man across performed the calculation that everyone performed simultaneously. De Niro arrived. He planted his left hand on the white linen. It creased, silverware shifted, leaned forward from the waist with the full weight of his body, and extended his right arm until his index finger was pointed directly at Clint's face. The surrounding ballroom registered it in the concentric, rippling way of rooms responding to genuine events. A wave of quieting moving outward through 600 people. And Clint Eastwood looked at Robert De Niro with eyes that communicated, in their complete and absolute stillness, precisely nothing. What De Niro said has been reconstructed from 9 people within clear hearing range. The accounts don't agree on every word, but converge on the essential architecture. He began with craft. The word itself, deployed with the precision of a man who had spent decades defining it and was now using the definition as a weapon. What craft demanded? The preparation, the psychological submission to a character not yourself. 60 pounds for a role, months with taxi drivers, veterans, criminals, until he could render those lives from the inside out. That's the work, De Niro said. That's what separates what we do from what anyone else does. He pointed at Clint. What Clint did was something else. The same walk, the same squint, the same minimal dialogue. An actor who never transformed, never risked, never disappeared into something requiring genuine sacrifice. Not the greatest representative of the craft, its most successful imitator. You play yourself, De Niro said. Every single time. You find a slightly different version of yourself, put it on screen, and people call it a performance. That's not acting. That's just showing up. The woman to Clint's right had both hands pressed over her mouth. The older man across had pushed back, creating distance. Clint had not moved, not 1 degree. Hands flat on the table. Eyes on De Niro, carrying the expression that would define for every person who witnessed it exactly who Clint Eastwood was when everything performative had been removed from the room. Not anger, not embarrassment, nothing. Absolute weaponized nothing. And in that nothing, the entire table began to understand that De Niro had walked 40 feet into a situation not going the way he had prepared for. 12 seconds. Multiple witnesses estimated it independently. 12 seconds of silence with De Niro's finger, recently in Clint Eastwood's face, and 600 people in suspended animation. 12 seconds is nothing in an evening. 12 seconds is a geological era in a confrontation. De Niro had expected a gap, a space where Clint's response would arrive. He was prepared to continue, to escalate, but Clint was not giving him a gap to fill. The silence was fully occupied by a quality of attention De Niro had not encountered in this configuration before. Clint watching him the way a man watches something he has already understood and is simply observing as it reaches its own conclusion. And in that occupied silence, something in De Niro's momentum had begun to crack. The first hairline fracture in the certainty of a man who had arrived absolutely sure of the ground he stood on. Because certainty requires friction. It requires something to push against. Clint was not engaging on any terms. Clint reached for his water glass, unhurried, took 1 sip, set the glass back exactly where it had been, and spoke. He didn't raise his voice. Every witness mentions this first. Low, unhurried, each word chosen rather than found. You've worked very hard, he said, for a long time. That's real. I mean that. A pause. But somewhere along the way, you confused the work with the result, the preparation with the performance. You've been so busy becoming the character that you forgot the character has to make someone feel something. Another pause. The table was not breathing. The audience doesn't care how much you weighed. They care whether they believed you. And believing you isn't about what you did before the camera turned on. It's about what happens when it does. He lifted his wine glass, held it without drinking. I've made people believe things for 30 years, not because I prepared myself into someone else, because I showed up as myself and trusted that to be enough. He set the glass down. It was enough. Not aggressive, not cold, simply final. The way a door closes in an empty house, not slammed, not eased, just closed. He turned back to the person on his right. What De Niro did next, the choice he made in the 5 seconds that followed, would follow him for decades. He didn't leave. He leaned forward again. That's craft, voice different now. Raw, the constructed quality of prepared argument, replaced by something more personal. Showing up and being yourself? Any person off the street can do that. That's luck. You got lucky with a face and a voice and an attitude audiences responded to. That's not the same as what I do. He believed it, the most genuine thing he had said all evening. But the room heard something De Niro didn't. The repetition, returning to the central claim after Clint's reply had quietly neutralized it, communicated something no amount of conviction could conceal. The prepared argument had found nothing to grip, and the improvised from the chest argument that replaced it was more honest but also more exposed. Clint looked at him. 1 second. 2. Bobby, he said, quietly, almost gently. You've been performing this argument for 10 minutes. If you could feel the audience, you'd know it ended 5 minutes ago. He turned back to his table. De Niro stood there. The cigarette at the edge of the ashtray had burned to nothing. The woman at the adjacent table had her hand pressed over her mouth so hard her knuckles had gone white. He straightened, adjusted his jacket, said something under his breath nobody caught, and walked back across 40 feet of Directors Guild ballroom carpet. The room exhaled, and then something happened at Clint's table that nobody had predicted and nobody who witnessed it ever forgot. The laughter started with one person. The director seated directly across from Clint began to laugh. Not loudly, not triumphantly. The helpless, involuntary laughter of someone for whom the gap between what just happened and what was expected has become too large to hold. Clint's expression contained, for the first time all evening, something adjacent to amusement. The recognition of something absurd that he had the grace not to celebrate and the honesty not to entirely conceal. 2 more people followed. The careful, quiet laughter of people who have been holding their breath and have been given permission to release it. The ballroom was reassembling its normal sound, but every table for the rest of that evening included some version of what had happened, the story already moving. Person to person, with the velocity of information that carries the stamp of something personally witnessed. By morning it had reached the studios. By the following week it had traveled into the permanent, unofficial oral history of an industry that keeps meticulous records of the things it never writes down. De Niro made films in the years that followed that consolidated his reputation as the defining actor of his generation. The king of comedy, Once Upon a Time in America, Cape Fear, work of genuine, extraordinary power. Proof that the argument he was making about craft was not wrong. It was simply being made to the wrong person in the wrong way. But there was one more thing. One quiet exchange that survived because it was the kind of thing that, once heard, attached itself permanently to the memory of the person who heard it. The woman to Clint's right waited until the noise had rebuilt itself, then leaned toward him. That was something, she said. Bobby's brilliant, he said. Absolutely. The commitment, the discipline, there's nobody better. She waited. But he came over here tonight because something is bothering him. Something that has nothing to do with me. And I couldn't fix it for him. Nobody can fix it except him. She asked what he thought was bothering him. He thinks that if enough people validate his method, he'll stop needing the validation, Clint said. But it doesn't work that way. The more you need people to confirm that your way is the right way, the less sure you actually are. He picked up his water glass. A man who's genuinely sure of himself doesn't need to walk across a room to tell someone else they're doing it wrong. He took a sip, set the glass down. He'll figure it out. He's too smart not to. In 1992, Clint Eastwood accepted Best Director and Best Picture for Unforgiven, built with the exact economy and moral weight that his entire career had been moving toward. The Academy had not confused presence for depth. In Clint's case, presence and depth had always been the same thing. De Niro continued making films that defined American cinema for 3 more decades. Whatever wound had driven him across 40 feet of ballroom carpet, he transformed it, the way extraordinary artists transform their wounds, into something that lasted. The 2 men were photographed together at industry events in the decades that followed. Cordial, professional. The careful distance of two people who have arrived at a complete understanding and decided the understanding is sufficient. But every person in that Beverly Hilton ballroom on March 14th, 1981, every person who watched Robert De Niro walk 40 feet with everything he believed in his hands and come back with something different, carried the memory the way genuine, unscripted moments get carried. Not as anecdote, as something closer to instruction. What a man reaches for when he's certain tells you less than what he does when the certainty doesn't hold. Clint Eastwood had known that his whole career, and on one March evening in Los Angeles, in front of 600 witnesses, the knowledge had been demonstrated with a completeness that required no further argument. It was enough. It had always been enough. Some rooms decide things without meaning to. This one had decided before the evening started.